Well, it's good that this is one of the lessons that I enjoy the most because we just did it and had a corrupted file, and I'm getting to redo it. But I guess there's never a problem with a rehearsal. Now, as we talked about last week, I broke finances into two parts because it really is two different worlds, all under the same issue. The first area of your accounting is critical, and it's necessary to have that before we talk about financing, although many people not only get financing ahead of accounting, they get financing at the head of the whole cart. I sent you that really kind of humorous clip on Show Me the Money, and time again entrepreneurs are focused on, well, just get me the money and I can make it work, and it just doesn't work that way. And so I like to say sometimes when you're talking about this, the accounting is the broccoli, it's the thing you need to eat, and the steak is really why you're sitting down for dinner. But they go together. But let me just repeat the issue about why we're taking this approach in this 8-week course. As a prelude, I want to apologize, but you don't apologize because it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. I know that, and that's okay for what we're trying to do here. Our goal is to focus on the mindset of the SST 7 and getting you understanding the pieces that have to be tied together as you go forward, and then giving you some actionable items. But also, those of you that are in this course, you're going to get a tremendous opportunity to participate in the Start, Strive, and Thrive Academy, where we go into much more detail on this, and you have access to us talking individually, where that's often not the case. So going back to the mindset, we talked about the accounting side of things as being the groundwork for getting into the process of being a free enterprise warrior. Now, one of the things that as we're gearing up for the fall courses and talking to a number of you and meeting with some of the Playhouse people, there's this issue here of making a clear distinction. And I appreciate and understand most of you that are not focused on Main Street, not focused on Wall Street, kind of think you don't have to worry about some of these things. And if you're just creating a job, and that's more than a hobby, but you're really just wanting to work out of your home, or maybe do a little bit of work, or sell some books, or be a consultant in your area of specialty, whether it's health oriented or motivational, that's okay. But that's not building a business, and there are different issues. However, and why it's worth your while to go through this, as we've repeated several times, the $1 trillion journey is the process that creates the opportunity, the innovation, and the wealth that has driven the society that we live in. And the reason we're focused on this is we want you to be successful, but more importantly, because your success benefits everybody else. It is the way we help fight the homeless situation and provide benefits to those who need them. And that's not a political discussion, but it's just the numbers show that. As we've talked about, the tsunami effect is our research into that area in the book that's going to be published soon that points out why that's so important. So it's not just being nice and making money and giving away some charity. It's the Adam Smith invisible hand that we've talked about and we'll touch on again, that makes it worthwhile for you to be on this journey, and worthwhile not just for you but for everybody else. But even if you're just starting a business for a job or to work out of the home a little bit and generate a little bit of income, this will benefit you as well, particularly because if you understand the point we've been making, while the application of the principles of business differ depending on whether you're an Elm Street, Main Street, or Wall Street venture or founder, the principles remain the same. The idea of profit and cash flow and understanding your market, they're identical. It's just the degree to which you have to develop those and attach them. So again, this course is we're working on giving you the mindset. The SST 7 is the framework for that, and then as we go beyond the framework, we're giving you the content to fill in each of those areas, and where you need to have more research or to take the later courses or to whatever it needs to help you flesh out that integrated approach to your own particular business model and to achieve your own particular goals. So we've touched on thus far, again, in any one of these, as I said, could be 8 hours on their own, and in our other material they are strategic, corporate, marketing, product, and I always add this because some people think if you say product and they're just doing a service, they don't have a product, but they don't have to worry about inventory. But many of the same principles apply. And then operations, same issue, and then administration. So as I indicated last week, we in gearing up for the mastermind on the accounting side, there's just a wealth of material. And interestingly enough, and I say this after having consciously visited and talked with and pulled down the course outlines, many of the things that we're talking about here in accounting aren't covered in an MBA. In fact, many MBAs aren't required to take accounting courses. So you may think only they have to worry about it, but ironically, even a lot of those people working in public companies don't appropriately deal with each of these 7 areas involved in the Stratia 7. But again, we made the distinction between finance and accounting. So the whole issue of accounting again drives your ability to morally, ethically, legally, and reasonably deal with finance, the financing of your business. And again, a lot of people, particularly over the last few weeks, I've talked to a couple and said, well, I'm not interested in investors, and I'm not really interested in getting financing for my business. And I'm saying, well, that means you don't either expect to be successful, or you don't understand what you're trying to do, or there's some other disconnect. Because if your business is going to grow, as we've talked about before and we'll repeat tonight, it requires capital. And that comes, for some strange reason over the past few decades, the idea of being a capitalist or capitalism has gotten to have a bad knock. We've literally had some of the professors that we work with in reviewing part of our materials warn us not to use the word capitalism, to use free enterprise, and not to talk too much about profit. Now, forget the politics, forget the wokeness. That's just crazy, because the bottom line is the idea of having capital is what separates today from the past thousands of years of man's history. I can't go into it in detail here, but if you remember the points we've made about the allocation of wealth as opposed to the creation of wealth, until the free enterprise system as it works in America, and again, the roots were in England, and Adam Smith was not an American, but that process of taking capital and letting individuals pursue their dreams in a government system where they paid the right amount of taxes to have a fair system and a reasonably level playing field, and I say that with quotes, again, in separate discussion, that's all capital. And we show you the chart, and it's really critical to revisit this right now, that for thousands of years, the wealth of the world was controlled not by the 1%, but by the 1/10 of the 1/10 of the 1%, and everybody else was poor. Everybody else. No one had to worry about their retirement. No one had to worry about their banking accounts. No one had to worry about their planning for their IRA and so forth, because they didn't have wealth. They didn't have capital to invest. But as we began to recognize the value of capital, that it started with the British mercantile system, where it started moving below that top wealthy people, that individual business people could have capital, they started developing the concepts and the ideas, and the East Indies Company was the first company that was incorporated, first corporation that was allowed individual regular people to invest in business with their capital and to start to seek a return. So it's a very, very significant thing that you understand that if you or in business, you must have a capital structure. In other words, how do you take capital, whether it's debt or equity, and we'll talk about that, or your own savings, your own capital, and ensure you're going to get a return on investment? Because that's the fundamental principle of the capitalist system. You accrue capital by making a profit and getting a return on investment, and in turn you deploy that capital where you think you'll get the best return on investment at the best level of risk that's acceptable to you. In your business, the use of capital comes in the term working capital. That is all the capital that is in your business that you use to develop your business and operate it and pay your bills and buy inventory. And it's an amount, and as you remember, and I'll come back to our logo, the JCI logo, we have that area, but let's talk about why that's important. We've mentioned Adam Smith, and we've mentioned the concept of the invisible hand, but let me repeat here. The idea of the invisible hand that makes a market economy so important is that, I want to go back and really make, is that the invisible hand is non-racist, non-sexist. It's not red or blue. It is not interested in anything but the efficient allocation of capital. And the principle invisible hand says that capital will be allocated to those businesses that prove they can generate a reasonable return on investment at a reasonable identified risk. Lacking that, the invisible hand will destroy the businesses that are out there that do not meet the test of the invisible hand. So when we talk about it in that context, we talk about we're in a market economy. And the single most important thing, again, this isn't politics, this isn't philosophy, this is a pure statement of fact. In a market economy, the consumer votes with their dollars on what companies should exist. They say, this company delivers a product or a service that I like and I enjoy, and I'm willing to pay for it. It solves a pain, solves a problem, takes away pain, gives me pleasure, so I'm going to vote for that company's existence. In a socialist economy, and again, there's no pure, but I'm talking about the concept here. You've got to understand there's a small group, sometimes as few as 5 or 6. In Russia, it got to be, and earlier in China, 200 or 300 people, and sometimes thousands, but it's still a very minute portion of the elite or the government people that are saying we're smart enough to figure out how to allocate this money. We're smarter than the invisible hand working the market economy. Never has worked, never will work better than the market economy. Now, the market has no compassion. So that's one reason some people say, well, I want the socialist because it makes things less painful. Another whole discussion, but you need to understand, because the market has no compassion, it doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care if you're trying to cure cancer or feed the poor or teach some people how to live more fulfilling lives. Your intention is irrelevant to the market and the invisible hand. By the same token, you can be, inventing dynamite or weapons for war, what some people would consider bad things, and the market doesn't care. If you deliver a product or service that the consumer will vote for with their dollars and allow you to make a reasonable profit at a reasonable risk, then you can say, show me the money, and the market economy will support you. Now, note this very carefully. Your vision requires survival. So I've been intrigued, even as our background, and when I get into talking about finances and everything, we've been doing more at the larger end, investing in companies that were out to make millions of dollars or to go public and to do larger fundings. And even though we've worked and seen over the last few years, after I retired from, I understand more about the small business mentality. We've done it ourselves and we see, but again, it's not enough to want to do right or say that I should get funded because this is a good thing. And I've had potential founders talk to me wanting an investment and use that approach. The market doesn't care. Now, ultimately, if you can build that branding and that positioning and deliver that product service in a way that meets the other market tests, that's a good positioning and that's a good thing. And certainly, as humans, we want to congratulate that. But I'm trying to separate here emotionally. You're going to be investing your life and your money and your time and your talents. Don't think that buys you self. Your customers, ultimately, very few of them will care. You'll find that they'll move in instantly to a better price or better quality, no matter how loyal you think they've been, with a few exceptions. But many large companies, Sears, Roebuck, and the companies we could just go down name after name after name that are no longer existed, at one time were the most popular, most loyal companies in the world by their brand. But I want to make this point. Your vision requires you to survive, to serve the people you want to serve. That means you've got to make a profit. That means you've got to compete. That means you've got to do battle with the competitors, whether they're directly in your space or a related space, that are taking the money that you want that customer to spend with you. And that's why I say generally you're going to be a free enterprise warrior if you're serious about building a business, whether it's out of your home, working in your skivvies and never touching inventory, or if you're out hiring lots of people and planning to open up national branches of what you're doing. So just as a revisit of what we're talking about here on JCI, again, I want to stress this circle here. That is called your initial startup working capital. And a lot of people miss this. And it was so important we built it into our logo. And we make the point here that, the planning, the pre-launch, and the seed capital, and the plan. We went into this in the accounting, but what I want to go back to make a point on is that this represents what you need in the bank, either before you start, or be sure it's going to be in your start, before you hit this curve where you're starting to generate positive cash flow and starting to generate profits. Now, ironically, and I really want to stress this, is that if you're successful, your growth is going to consume cash, and fast growth consumes cash fast. Now, that's a difficult concept to get, but that definition of cash that you need to support your growth, or you need to get started, is your working capital, okay? And you need to understand how critical it is for you to not run out of working capital, which a lot of people say when companies fail because they didn't have enough working capital. That's only part of the story. I believe it's because of human relations, and there's a lot of other issues that are related to that. And we've had active debates with some of the people that write those books and put that material out there, and I've got a whole host of material. But bottom line, there's a simple fact that if you don't have the cash, you're not going to survive. I mean, big companies, small companies, little companies. So it's very important to understand in the early phases of your business, your profits are not going to be enough to support your growth. It's very rare, and today, more than ever before, you can do that in some businesses, but it's still something you should not count on. And again, we went into talking about the issues here in Dirty Dozen Dictums, but just to repeat that cash dictates your destiny, and it's very important that you understand that profit doesn't equal cash, and that profit is essential. So those three married together, if you don't understand what this is, we need to have a talk. You need to spend some time with it, because I'm telling you, this is as essential as you coming to the point of understanding that I need to eat food with the right nutrients, or I'm going to hurt my body. And it's even more critical than that. It's like saying you got to have air and you got to have blood to survive. Now, one of the best things that ever happened, I know how difficult this is, because I've been in business for a little while after I left the corporate world, and we were building our businesses. And one of my attorneys, I had the good fortune, he was a friend and supporter of the SMU School of Owner Managed Business. And there was a young guy named Jerry White there. He'd come on with the founder of that institute at SMU, one of the best in the country. And the founder had died of cancer, so Jerry took it over, and I got to sit through a few of the classes with the founder. Then he was gone and came back. But they taught several courses that I went to, and I ended up sending a lot of my people to that course, and we ended up having Jerry train some of the boards we put together when we were doing acquisitions and mergers. But Jerry did this wonderful example, and I basically, with his permission, have stolen it. It's one of the classes we teach. We've updated it for what we're doing. But we start with a company at the beginning phase and show that it does a phenomenal job of sales and making a profit. But it goes bankrupt because it doesn't pay attention to that issue of cash. Now that's what they call counterintuitive. We say the classic thing is, well, I just need to go sell some more stuff to get my payroll. A lot of times going to sell some more stuff will exacerbate the problem you've got in making payroll. So all of this to this point is to talk about working capital. You need to finance your business. And then they come down to the question, okay, how do I finance my business? And it really comes down to one of two things: debt financing and equity financing. Now, ultimately, your profits end up in Apple's a classic modern example of profits just running out the zone. Microsoft became successful because the way they licensed their that's another whole great story, but the way they licensed their software to IBM meant they were getting more cash than they could spend. Microsoft, that really didn't need to go public. They only went public because the laws were such that they got so many people with equity in the company as they were growing. They had to. They didn't need the cash. But those rare examples do exist today, but that's not going to be you in 99% of the cases in what we're talking about. So you're going to have to get that working capital by bringing in debt or bringing in equity. Now, you can be the one providing the equity, and you can be the one providing the debt. But it's really important to know what you're doing and how you're doing it, and doing it in a way that is smartest for you, not just running up your credit cards or taking money out of your banking account and not realize what you're doing. So that goes back to, again, the term that's very important for you as a level of sophistication as a business person, as a free enterprise warrior, to fully understand your capital structure. Your capital structure is going to be unique to you. It's going to be based on your business model. It's going to be based on your goals and objectives, and it's going to be on how you choose to use the mix of debt or an equity. Now, it could be 100% of one and 0 of the other, but it'll ultimately be both in some form, and it needs to be planned and managed. So as you go forward making that decision or trying to evaluate which is better for me, it's a process of trade-offs. I love the way Thomas Sowell, who's just a phenomenal economist and philosopher, talks about everything in our world is an issue of trade-offs. We could stop global warming if it's due to to fossil fuels today by not letting anybody use any fossil fuels. Well, we know that's a stupid alternative, but it's a trade-off, okay? And almost every decision you make, particularly as a small business person, is a trade-off. So here's a macro chart. Over the years, I've got a more, this is backed up by a more sophisticated class that goes into each of these details, but let's just look at some of them in general. There's two fundamental questions for you to decide on the issue of ownership and control. And it's very important for you to realize that ownership and control are never the same. Now, if you're a sole practitioner and you're running your business and you have 100% ownership and you have 100% control, yeah, it's the same. But if you're anything beyond that, if you have any partners, you give up any equity, or you have any kind of debt, you're giving up some form of your control. So you can look at the trade-offs, and Normally you see a pro or con, debt on this side and equity on that side, but each of these has a pro and con within its own context depending on the topic you're considering. So let's just look at a couple of them. If you use debt to build your business, you don't give up any ownership to an outsider. The negative is you normally have to put up collateral, whether it's your personal signature or the machine you're buying, your computers or whatever. If you don't make your payments, someone can take that back. You still own your company, but you may not have anything in your company. On the other hand, with equity, the con is you do give up ownership, but the pro is that you don't run the risk of them coming in and taking away your business. Now, your business is diluted a little bit, and that word dilution is important. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But it's usually not the problem most people think it is when they're at this stage and starting up. They're worried about, I don't want to give up control, I don't want to give up ownership, for the totally wrong reasons. And it's very important to make that decision for the right reasons, and don't give up a tool you've got without understanding the power of that tool. So the same thing comes down in each of these areas: paying interest, principal, cash flow, the use of leverage. Smart business tells you to use leverage, but equity, you're really not leveraging them. You're just giving them money and taking it back. But debt allows you to have leverage in your business where you're getting more out of your dollars. You put up 10%, you use 90% debt, and if it goes up, you get 90% of the benefit more than if you had just your 10%. If it goes down, you've got the other side. You all know that. Then the issue of future profits and value. We'll talk about that in just a second, but understand the beautiful thing about debt: if you can afford it and if your cash flow covers it, then you pay off that debt and it's done. You got the benefit and you're going forward. But at the same time, while you're carrying that debt, it makes a negative entry on your balance sheet. It makes the valuation of the company a little lower. On the other hand, with equity, you get no leverage, but you get the money to go apply it and do what you're doing with what you're talking about, and it adds a benefit to your balance sheet. It adds a value to your company. If your company is worth $1 million and somebody invests $200,000, you're now worth $1.2 million. And that goes back into the dilution. And again, I know many of you won't grab that on first conversation, and that's okay. Don't feel bad. It's like with me in trigonometry. It took me a while to understand that concept, but it's very critical that you do get your head around that if you're going to do anything related to building or financing your business. Then there's the issue of risk, and there's the issue of time frame and liquidity, and what you do, and we'll jump into that. Like I say, the key here is not to go over each one of these, but to make you aware of the trade-offs in determining what debt and what equity I'm going to use. Don't just automatically say I'm going to do all equity. Don't automatically say I'm never going to use equity or I'm going to use all debt. And more importantly, figure out, the way we'll talk about in a minute, at the right times to bring in equity. And boy, this is where it's fun. This is the game. Bringing in equity in successive pieces as you build your valuation, then you maximize. And that comes close to giving you the idea of leverage. But it's that whole idea of creating your capital structure with the right mix of debt and equity. Now, this is just one brief example to make a point here. And instead of walking through this whole thing, I want to make a point here that if you decided I'm going to give up equity in my company, and I'm going to give up 20%. Basically, I've got $10 million of value. I'm going to take $2 million. You add $2 million. The company is worth at that point in time $12 million, and your price per share. You can come back and say, hey, you now have 17% less inventory. I mean, less stock ownership. But you have a higher valuation. That's the term dilution. On the other hand, if you use debt, The only thing questionable on this chart, and I debated it, but it makes a point. If you look at the equity value post-investment, and you look at the $10 million, depending on how you're structuring the debt, this number would actually be $8 million. Because if you took on $2 million in debt, you would lower the value on the balance sheet. But the key is you've retained 100% and you have no dilution that's gone out. And if you're able to pay that debt off in the 4 years, it's over and it's done with, and you don't have to pay it anymore. Now, the important thing beyond that is to understand there's also a variation of that, and that's called a convertible debenture. We won't confuse you more with talking about it a lot today, but let me just say that most of the deals being placed today, all venture capital deals, I don't know of any in the last few years, and I've read a lot of the offerings and looking at it, but even the smaller deals like 10 Capital in Austin and the family office deals that they're looking at, they all have a convertible debenture, and that offers the opportunity to mix the risk and to mix the return. Let me just give you a simple example. If Cousin Bob was going to loan you $10,000 as a debt, then you owe him $10,000. You'll pay it off. He gets it back. And your fine is done. On the other hand, if Cousin Bob's a little bit hesitant and says, well, I really think you're going to be successful, but I need the interest on this money, and I live off of this, and I love you to death. But so then you can say, well, here's what we'll do, Cousin Bob. I'll take the $10,000. If you were going to put it in the company as equity right now, I'd give it to you at $1 a share, and you'd get 10,000 shares. But what I'm going to do over the next 4 years, I'm going to make you interest payments. And you can even work it out. You're not making principal payments if it's a convertible debenture. You're just making interest, which makes it easier. But you watch what goes on over the 4 years. And any time during that 4 years, up to the 4-year point, and we'll have 30 days then, you can tell me, I really like what you've done. I want to convert all or part, whatever you agree to, of my $10,000 into $2 shares. Now note what's happening here. He is getting, of the remaining balance, if you've been making payments, or he can let the interest accrue so there's no cash flow going out, that he's minimized his risk by waiting to see if you use the money you gave him to make a more profitable business. But he's also lowered his return. Now he's buying $2 shares instead of $1. But he's more likely to believe that $2 share is going to become a $10 share than he did when it was a $1 share. And for you, you can see the benefits on your side. So it's this creativity. And I'll come to this in a moment if you consider using something like a convertible debenture. But the idea again, and I know I'm moving fast and covering a lot of areas here, but let's reduce it back down to the key issue. Debt, which you've got to repay. Equity, which you don't. Now let's talk about that for a moment. If you pay back a $50,000 loan, you never have to give them another dollar. You paid the interest, you paid the principal, you own the machine or whatever it paid for. On the other hand, you could only get $50,000 in debt, but you really need $200,000. So then you do a $200,000 equity placement because you can get the equity, you figure, better than the debt. Now there's 3 principles going to work here. First of all, you never have to pay that money back. It's yours in the company. Great. However, once you start making profits and have to pay dividends, you have to pay those dividends forever. Unless the company gets successful enough that you can buy it back and they want to buy it back, sell it back to you, but you're on the hook for that forever. And the third thing is that the nice thing about an investor giving you more time than a debt situation does, there comes a point in time where you're either going to need more capital or more equity, and you need to increase the valuation in your company in the meantime, or you're out of luck there. There are other risks that we'll talk about in a minute, but I should have put this slide in here, and everybody has seen it. It's the box with risk and return. On this side is risk, and this is return. And the theory is the greater the risk and investment, the greater the return should be. And that's all well and good, and that's accurate. You put the government bond down here, it's virtually guaranteed you're going to get your interest on that and get your principal back. You take a high-risk junk bond up here, get the highest possible return, but you may not get your interest and you may not get your principal back. And that's part of the key. A lot of people don't understand what risk means. And I always like to say, when you as a small business person say, I'm going to take the risk, understand that risk becomes a cost. And the question is, can you afford the cost? If you say, I'm going to take the risk on Cousin Bob's money, but you fail, and you owe Cousin Bob $10,000, and you put everything you had, you just don't have the ability. You got to go get a job to repay Cousin Bob. Is the cost of the risk when it comes payable worth the loss in the family relationship? And we can have lots of discussions on that. But the risk return issue and risk becoming a cost is something worth talking about at length. But assuming for a moment you've done your homework, you have your plan for business, you've done your analysis, you have your marketing, you've put your accounting together, you know you can do the operations, you can deliver the product or service, then what you want to be looking at is an equity map. Now, this is intimidating to almost anybody that looks at it, and surprisingly, a lot of fairly sophisticated investors. And I'm not going to dive into it here. You're going to get the benefit of getting this app and getting this spreadsheet, but what it indicates is that you can lay out over a specific period of time your plan for maximizing the value of your business. And I'm going to issue shares at this point at 50 cents, at this year at $1, at this point at $2, so that you minimize your dilution and maximize the valuation of your company as you grow your company. Now, to help illustrate this, we've mentioned it, some of you, we have the $1 Trillion Journey book series, and it includes a story from the Main Street and Wall Street and Elm Street tied together, where we use this in the book, and they're tied to the chapters of the book. There's 36 chapters, and it shows where the company is in revenue, valuation, ownership by the founders and so forth at each of those stages. And we'll get a copy of that and come back to it. But the key is that it lays out your source and use of funds relative to your equity, if you're going to use equity, and it has debt in there, so that you can plan out on your growth where the stock's going to come from. Where the cash is going to come from. Now, let me say this about that. Excel's both the bane and the blessing of the whole investment community, and as anybody who's worked with it knows, you can have an Excel spreadsheet tell you anything. And I, years ago, started building my models. I never put in the final number till I built all the I don't design formulas to arrive at a number. I put in all the best assumptions I possibly can, negative and positive. And then finally, when it's all done, I run my sum and say, oh my gosh, I need 2 million instead of 1 million. The very first deal I did almost 40 years ago was an offering. I raised $1.1 million and in 48 hours, and just thought, man, I've got it made. You'll find a download on this week's lesson plan on crowning the prince, and that goes back to my first experience. A lot of people think getting that first amount of money funded, they've won. They crack the champagne open and say, now I've done it. But it always takes longer. It always takes more cash flow. So when we say develop a source and use of funds, this means all sources of cash, everything you can think of that's a part of that revenue, an insurance settlement, your sales that you're going to have, your debt that you're going to borrow, money from your credit cards, money, checks that you're going to write to the company, any potential investors. And then all uses of cash. And boy, this is a biggie. It's so hard. You got to think of every single thing, and paying yourself. I won't dwell on it here, but one of the biggest mistakes small business people make, and I mentioned it in the accounting side, include an owner's compensation in your numbers. 3 very critical reasons. Number 1, the IRS mandates that you do that before you end up figuring out what your profits and taxes are, and your payment has got to be within the industry standard of your NAICS code that we talked about. Number 2, you need to see what it's really costing you to run this business. It breaks my heart sometimes when I meet with a friend of a friend or go over the numbers with them and look at them, and there's no line for owner's compensation, and they think they're making a little money and they're looking to, how do I go raise money? And bottom line, they're giving their time to the company for free, and nobody's going to believe that, and that's not good for you. It's not good for them saying, well, I'll pay myself later. You have to have that in the numbers. It's different from a cash flow. You can reinvest your check, or you can not cash your check, but have it on your accounting books. And the third reason is that if anybody ever wants to invest in your business or buy your business, the first thing the sophisticated, savvy person is going to do, one of the first things we always looked on the finances was to see what is the owner compensation level. Sometimes it was way too high, sometimes it was way too low, and they were hiding it here and doing that. And we're not talking about illegal double books, although we always find some of that. What we're talking about is realistically forecasting your cash flow so you know how to manage the business. So once you have that source and use of funds, and you now are saying, okay, what's my capital structure going to be? You want to look at what sources of debt you are using or you can use. Now, I'm going to make a comment here about your banker, and I mentioned it in the, I had to redo this, so I mentioned it in the mastermind, is you need to understand that bankers are not going to fund your startup. If you fund your startup with a bank loan, it's because you signed on it as a personal liability. They're funding you, and you're taking the money, put it in your business. The banker's not going to agree to fund a startup. Not a chance. I keep waiting for somebody to tell me they did it without a personal guarantee, and there was a day back in the day where you could get that, but not in a long time. So again, we can't dwell at length here, but look at all the sources of debt you encounter. Don't ignore your credit cards and the personal expenses you're running up. If you're running your business on your home internet, and you've had to up your internet expenses because of that, other than what you'd have to show Netflix or whatever, that's a business expense you need to track. And it's minor, but there's a lot of other areas you'll find that you may have added a rider to your insurance policy, and you don't show that in your numbers. You're not running your business by your numbers. And I'll make a quick comment here on this idea: build your business credit. I know a couple of people are involved in doing this that are working with some of the Playhouse people and some of this. I think this is so important. And less than 20% of founders do this right. And the simple fact is, while you can't have a bank loan you money near term, if you start from day one, even in a really small business, over 2 or 3 years, you can build up $150,000, $250,000 in credit card levels that you can use for your business. You say, well, why would I want that? Well, generally, you can keep the balances very small and not be paying the interest, although the nice thing is that interest is deductible, and that's another whole discussion. This whole thing is another discussion. But you might have the opportunity, the little gal that we know from Jeff Walker's launch that did the yarn business, one of her providers went out of business. Well, she had credit card debt lines that she could go and buy that inventory in that machine at 10 cents on the dollar, turn around, pay off the credit card, make a real nice return out of that. She could have never done that on her own. She would have never had time to get a bank to approve it, or she possibly could have gotten private financing. But what a wonderful thing to have business credit. Now, the distinction here is personal credit you have to pay. Non-recourse business credit that's based on your business over a period of time, and there's a window there that you can start immediately building it, but then over a period of time, and beginning really after 2 years, you can have substantial business card non-recourse credit where if a pandemic hits or God forbid you get ill or something happens and the business is shut down, you do your best to pay your bills, but the nice thing is if it just comes down to it, there's no liability to you or your family for that business credit that you've built up. Now, and Lord, I'm really concerned just to be able to touch on this right now, but if you do anything that involves shares in your company, promised or issued, you're issuing securities. You're involved in the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission world. Now, very briefly, after the 1929 crash and depression, rightly or wrongly, big debate, but they wanted to blame the stock promoters for all of that, and they were partly to blame, but notwithstanding that, the government overreacted, and we came up with the Securities Act, and they basically said, look, if you want to issue shares in any company, you can only do that after we at the federal level have passed on this filing document. We're going to show you. You have today. It's called a Form 21. I mean, there's several different versions, but basically, it's a very comprehensive. Certainly, before going public, you file that with the SEC, and they review it. They make comments. You go back and forth. Well, even back then, it was cumbersome and expensive, but today it can take a couple of years and a couple of $1 million to get that registration statement approved. Way back then into today, they recognized that small businesses couldn't do that, so they had a few exemptions from registration. They would say, okay, you small company, under these restrictions, and it was generally covered under Reg D, Regulation D of the Securities Act, you can raise money under these very constrained, very limited ways, and you don't have to file a major registration, but you have to file a private placement memorandum. And in this private placement memorandum, you have to say all these things and do all these things. The other key thing that made a distinction is the difference between an accredited and a non-accredited investor. Now, again, that changes almost annually over the last few years, and in fact, they've now added the Reg CF and a Reg A. We'll talk about in just a second. So it's not just the Regulation D. This, I've mentioned a couple times, this is the best time in the world to ever be starting a small company. It's also the best time in the U.S. history, post-1929, 1935, to be raising money as a small company, because there's a lot of private equity out there, and the rules have loosened up. Under Reg D, that we did dozens of placements under Reg D, we could only have 35 investors that were not accredited, and we had a defined number of investors, total 35 altogether, and we could not advertise that. We could not talk to just anybody about it. We had to be working with people who knew us or knew our business. Today, with Reg CF, you can advertise your investment. You can have up to a couple thousand investors. There's just a lot of wonderful things that are available. Another whole discussion. But if you're looking at, we make the distinction here between families and friends money versus private money. If you're using Cousin Bob or Uncle Jim, you can do it a certain way. You still need to follow the securities regulations. Friendship and blood are not enough when it comes to securities violations. Another whole story, horror stories we've experienced, we've seen, we know of. They're just rampant. But then if you go to private equity, that's a sophisticated world out there now that is getting increasingly sophisticated, but there's billions of dollars available. And I always say there's more good deals out there, there's more capital out there to go into small deals and investments than there are good small deals and investments. And by good, I mean those that have a really good plan for business, a really good approach to what they're doing, that can convince those people you're one of the rare ones that they should take the risk with. Now, at the same time, I want to be clear. Today, we've tried to do the numbers. We've done estimates and we've talked. We don't know. So it's just a swag on our part. We think that any given time there are 500,000 small business out there that are violating the securities laws. Now they get away with it for a number of reasons. First, the numbers aren't that big, and secondly, we call the good deal exemption. You end up getting to a position where you can pay the money back, or you get the stock issued and no one ever sues you for it, or they don't go to the SEC. But let me tell you the reason that's a problem. I assume most of you want to succeed. And in today's world, if you're successful, it's increasingly likely, if you have any kind of revenue at all, that you're going to be an attractive acquisition target for a larger company trying to increase its earnings. Now, that's, again, another discussion to have you understand, but big companies are looking for ways to increase their earnings quickly rather than just from organic growth. If you built the right company in the right industry, they'll want to buy you. However, there's a thing called due diligence. And if they get in to look at your company, one of the first things they do is look at your capital structure to see if you've done any screwy or weird private placements over the time. And if you haven't done it correctly, that oftentimes can't be healed. It can be by a rescission offer, but again, that's a very complicated and often expensive process. So you may lose the opportunity to cash out in your exit strategy at a high valuation simply because you were lazy about complying with all the securities laws. Now, today, again, there's variations. At the federal level, there's 3 types of fundings that are available to do as little as $250,000, and it's affordable to do it at that level, and up to $50 million or above. You can effectively almost go public under a Reg A, much easier than before the Jobs Act. And this is continuing. They're actually, it's one thing that's surprising, they're actually continually making it more attractive. They're loosening up some of the rules and making it easier to take advantage of the internet in this new world in investing. So it's a great time to be looking at that. But again, all I can stress right now is we're not attorneys, we're not accountants. But let me tell you, if you're going to be involved with any form of securities or equities, and if in your debt offering you tell Cousin Morris, you just blithely put in the letter, and I'll let you buy into the company later, you've just made that a security. So it is something you need to have an expert sharing with you. And again, realize Cousin Bob may never be a problem for you. But we always tell our entrepreneurs, stop and think. Well, things change, things happen. You could end up having Cousin Morris divorce or pass away, and then you're dealing with Cousin Morris's widow, who is a 19-year-old that he married, one reason, or the lawyer. So you just have to take the most adversarial position you can, thinking about what can go wrong. Now, here's the point about working capital. It's easy to delay dealing with working capital, but it's easier to deal with it first. The worst situation in business that I ever found myself in was when the dot-com, I tell the story elsewhere, but basically I was meeting at Denny's with, in fact, Jerry White and 2 other people at 5 o'clock in the morning. We had an 8 o'clock payroll, very large payroll. We were going and blowing, and the bank we were dealing with had failed the day before. So we were trying to figure out how we made payroll by 9 o'clock in the morning. So the key is that every day you can delay having to pay something aids your cash flow. So if you've got vendors that you have 30-day terms with and you can get them to give you 60 or even 90, you just lowered that little red group of money you needed in your working capital, and on an ongoing basis lower the impact as you grow. If you have something that is costing you $2.30 an item, whatever it is, and you can meet with the guy and say, hey, I'd rather have that at $1.80 and I can get it over here. I took the time to look for it. And he's going to say, okay, well, again, the way everything fits together, you've improved your profitability. That's all well and good. But the important thing is you've improved your cash flow. And we've got a whole checklist of things to look at how you can delay paying. The other side is every day you can speed up cash, aids in cash flow. You'd be surprised. A lot of people don't mind paying you earlier if you give them a little bit of a discount or if you simply ask them. Now, again, another reason it's the best time in the world. I just boggles my mind sometimes when I do something and a PayPal payment comes in. I think the big thing for me that as an old school guy, I realized the world had changed. And I won't tell you the whole story here because we're running out of time, but I used to do some, in fact, the first company we built, we sold to a company called Argon in England. A big deal. It took a lot of time and money and going back and forth. But a few months ago, I did something for a company in Australia that had a partner in London, and I did it and sent it to them. And about 2 hours after I finished the work, the money was in my PayPal account. I just went, wow, that's neat. And a lot of people experience it. I have one friend, he likes to leave the beep on at night, and he likes to go to sleep hearing every few minutes, ding, ding. He sold a little, he sells toys and things, but I mean, it was just, that's pretty neat. But again, never before in history could that kind of thing happen. But everything you can do to speed up your cash flow, the old checks in the mail doesn't apply anymore, but it's an important consideration for you. But here's the thing. Time is money. Better cash flow lowers your working capital needs and affects your whole capital structure and your debt and equity balance. So take time to figure out your working capital as it relates to your source and use of funds, and you're going to save yourself a whole lot of problems. Now, another whole class that I wish we had time to get in. We've got over 30 items, everything from factoring to how to get advanced receivables payment other than factoring, and ways to improve your financing that don't involve expensive debt or cheap equity. So take time to really study put your plan together. Like I say, this is all integrated. Once you've done your research, once you have a compelling story, you've identified your niche, and you can communicate that story, then you have the opportunity to look at creative financing other than just going and pitching an investor and working those pieces together. Another part of that is looking at your exit strategy, because it becomes really important for you to figure out early on, okay, I've built this thing that's valuable, I did the accounting, I've done the financing right, now how am I going to maximize the valuation that I get from my company? So again, forgive the water hose if forgiveness is necessary, the fire hose, but boil it down to 3 points for the water hose. Okay, number one, know your numbers. If you're not willing to know your numbers, you don't belong in business. Pure and simple. I've had arguments over and over again, but bottom line, I stand by what I just said. Know your numbers. Second, profit is a survival criterion. There is no business, no matter how large or no matter how small, that can survive an extended period of time if it's not generating a profit by a specific time and continues to show it can do that. And third, profit is not cash. Don't mislead yourself in putting your plans together. Well, I can sell these 100 units and that's going to give me this, and then I can go buy some more and I can do that. The things you see on some of the TV shows and everything. That's not business. That's making a deal, and that's fine, but that's not building a business. So that's the financing. This is what I love. It's like the magic part of business, and the people on Wall Street make billions with what we call the golden crumbs, all this money flowing, and they're just doing little pieces of it. Most of them don't understand these pieces of business. They're manipulating financial instruments and taking percentages off of those golden crumbs. You would be the ones creating the value that they end up making crumbs off. So next week in our final course, we're going to do a wrap-up pulling all these things together, and we're going to focus on some key questions for you to sit and answer for yourself in light of the 7 lessons we've had in preparing to go forward and taking advantage of some of the materials that we will be offering to you, and other people we can send to you that can help you as well. So thanks for going through this. Look at the materials on the website, and we'll see you at the Mastermind or Course 8, Lesson 8 next week. Thanks.